Here's a strange fact worth sitting with before we go any further. Humans were carving detailed cave art, sailing boats across open water, and firing arrows from a bow thousands of years before anyone built a wheel. Fire, farming, pottery, even long ocean crossings, all of it came first. The wheel, something that looks almost embarrassingly obvious to us today, showed up remarkably late in the human story. So why did something this simple take so long, and how did humans finally figure it out? To understand why the wheel was actually a hard problem, we first need to understand what people were doing before it existed. For thousands of years, moving anything heavy meant dragging it. A load could be lashed to a simple sledge, a flat wooden platform resting directly on the ground, and pulled by hand or by animal across snow, wet grass, or dirt greased with animal fat to reduce friction slightly. Archaeological evidence for sledges in northern Europe stretches back to around 7000 BCE. It worked in the sense that loads did eventually get where they needed to go, but an enormous amount of the effort involved was wasted as friction. Heat generated at the point where the sledge scraped against the ground, rather than useful forward. For several thousand years of settled farming life, that was simply the ceiling on how efficiently anyone could move. Something heavy over land. The entire story of the wheel, in a real sense, is the story of humans slowly discovering that an object moving in a circle experiences dramatically less resistance than a flat object sliding across the same surface. It wasn't about making loads lighter. It was about making the friction between the load and the ground almost disappear. So who actually built the first one? This is genuinely difficult to answer with confidence, because wheels are made largely of wood, and wood rarely survives thousands of years buried in soil. The oldest complete wooden wheel ever recovered came out of a marsh in Slovenia in the early 2000s, examined by a research team associated with the Slovenian Academy of Sciences. Radiocarbon dating placed the wheel at... This wheel is roughly 5,200 years old. It is made from ash wood, with a square axle hole cut through its center, and a matching wooden axle found beside it. Evidence that wheel and axle functioned together as one working unit, not simply a decorative disc. But this Slovenian wheel is almost certainly not the very first wheel ever built, just the oldest one that happened to survive. Other evidence points to an earlier date. In southern Poland, researchers studying a ceramic vessel associated with the funnel beaker culture identified what appears to be an engraved image of a four-wheeled wagon. Dated to roughly 3500 BCE, several centuries before the Slovenian wheel itself, though the interpretation of that image has been debated since it was first published. Separately, in northern Germany, archaeologists documented actual wheel ruts, physical track marks pressed into the ground by a wheeled vehicle, sealed beneath a burial mound dated to around 3400 BCE. Those tracks had to exist before the mound was built over them, meaning wheeled vehicles weren't a novelty at that point. They were routine enough to leave lasting marks on the landscape. Taken together, this evidence strongly suggests the true first wheel predates even these examples, likely by a meaningful margin. And here's where the story becomes genuinely strange. Early evidence for wheeled vehicles. That doesn't appear in just one place. It shows up across a huge stretch of territory: Mesopotamia, the Pontic-Caspian steppe, Central Europe, and the Caucasus, all within a relatively narrow window of time. Some researchers studying this pattern, including linguist and archaeologist David Anthony, have argued this near-simultaneous appearance makes more sense as a single invention spreading rapidly across existing trade and contact networks than as multiple, unrelated groups independently solving an extremely difficult engineering problem with decades of each other. Part of this argument rests on language itself. Nearly every branch of the Indo-European language family shares a common root word for wheel, which suggests the concept already existed before those languages split apart from a shared ancestor, likely somewhere on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, sometime between roughly 3500 and 3000 BCE. So why exactly did this technology take so long to appear at all, given how straightforward it looks in hindsight? The honest answer isn't that ancient people lacked cleverness. It's that the wheel is a far stranger invention than it appears, and the genuinely hard part was never the round shape itself, it was the axle. Think through what a working wheel actually requires. A round object on its own does very little useful work. A log rolls just fine, but you can't attach a load directly to a rolling log and expect it to go anywhere useful. The moment you want to connect a stationary platform to something that spins, you need an axle, a shaft running through the center of the wheel that links the rotating part to the fixed part above it. And getting that connection right is a far more delicate problem than it looks. If the fit between wheel and axle is too tight, friction locks everything in place and nothing turns. Too loose, and the wheel wobbles, catches, and eventually fails. Producing that precise a fit, a genuinely round hole matched to a genuinely round shaft, using only stone, bone, and wood tools, with no lathe and no metal, required a level of woodworking precision that simply didn't exist everywhere. Historian Richard Bulliet, who has written extensively on the history of this technology, has argued that the tolerances required for a functional wheel and axle system were realistically only achievable by communities that had already spent generations refining carpentry skills, likely through boat and house construction, long before anyone thought to apply that same precision to transportation. The first wheel wasn't built by the first person who noticed that round things roll downhill. It was built by a skilled woodworker standing on top of generations of inherited technical knowledge. There's another reason the wheel took so long to prepare, and it has nothing to do with human intelligence at all. It has to do with biology. Researcher Michael LaBarbera, writing in a well-known 1983 paper, pointed out something genuinely elegant. Nature never produced a true wheel. No animal, no plant, uses resembling a freely rotating wheel and axle system because a truly spinning component would have to be completely disconnected from the rest of the organism's blood supply and nerves, something evolution simply can't accomplish. Nearly every other major human invention had been boats echo floating logs, shelters echo animal dens, cutting tools echo sharp rocks and thorns and claws. The wheel had nothing like that to copy. Someone had to imagine it, entirely from scratch, with no working example anywhere in the natural world. Interestingly, humans were already making things spin for an entirely different purpose, well before any of this. The potter's wheel, a slow-turning platform used to shape clay, appears in Mesopotamia as early as roughly 4500 BCE, a full 1,000 years before the earliest solid evidence of wheeled transport. But this almost certainly isn't a direct ancestor of the transport wheel. A potter's wheel spins on a vertical axis and simply needs smooth, gentle rotation. A wheel meant to carry a loaded cart spins on a horizontal axis and needs to bear real weight while surviving the shock of uneven ground, an entirely different engineering challenge. The two technologies likely emerged from the same broader current of growing technical sophistication, rather than one directly inspiring the other. Once the wheel finally existed, though, humans wasted no time trying to improve it. The earliest transport wheels were solid, built from several thick wooden planks pegged together into a rough disc, since simply slicing a circle off the end of a tree trunk would split apart under load, along the wood's natural grain. These solid wheels were heavy, sometimes tens of kilograms each, meaning a loaded cart's draft animals were hauling a significant amount of dead weight before a single item of cargo was even added. Builders had to shape the disc, smooth its outer rim for even rolling, bore a precise center hole for the axle, and regularly grease the contact surfaces with animal fat to keep friction from causing the wood to swell and seize entirely. Remains of exactly this kind of solid-wheeled cart have been found in burial mounds associated with the Yamnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, dated to roughly 3100 to 2600 BCE, evidence of a herding society using these vehicles to move belongings, tents, and even their dead across vast grassland. For well over 1,000 years, that heavy, slow, solid wheel was simply the state of the art. Then, around 2000 BCE, on the steppe near the Ural Mountains, something changed everything. Archaeological work at sites associated with the Sintashta culture uncovered the oldest known spoked wheels, found in burial pits alongside the remains of two-wheeled chariots. These spoked wheels, built with 8 to 12 spokes radiating from a central hub, weighed only a fraction of a comparable solid wheel. A dramatic engineering leap that, when paired with another technology, these same communities had already mastered the domesticated horse, produced something genuinely new to the ancient world, the chariot. The chariot represented the first genuinely fast military platform in human history, where infantry armies had always moved at little more than walking pace. A chariot could carry an archer across a battlefield at speeds no foot soldier could hope to match, firing while moving and repositioning before an enemy formation could even react. Within a few centuries of its appearance on the steppe, This technology spread across an enormous stretch of the ancient world, adopted and adapted by the Hittites in Anatolia, introduced to Egypt, and eventually refined there into something lighter and faster still. Used by Mycenaean Greek warriors, present in chariot burials associated with China's Shang dynasty, and referenced repeatedly in some of the earliest surviving Indian religious literature. The chariot wasn't cheap, requiring specially bred and trained horses, and years of practice to use
effectively, and it reshaped the military and social hierarchies of nearly every civilization that adopted it. One of the largest
chariot battles in recorded history, fought between Egyptian and Hittite forces in the 13th century BC, is estimated to have involved several thousand
chariots combined, all resting on the same basic engineering principle worked out on the steppe centuries earlier. Eventually, mounted cavalry made the chariot itself obsolete, but the wheel didn't disappear along with it. It simply moved into new roles entirely: heavy wagons, trade carts, and eventually the vast paved road networks that later empires built specifically to accommodate wheeled traffic at scale. And yet, in several parts of the world, the wheel never took hold as transportation at all, and this absence turns out to be just as revealing as its presence elsewhere. Nowhere in the pre-Columbian Americas do we find wheeled vehicles in practical use, despite enormous, sophisticated urban societies capable of building massive cities and vast road networks entirely without them. Strangely, archaeologists have recovered small ceramic figurines from ancient Mesoamerica fitted with tiny, functional wheel and axle assemblies on their legs, evidence that the underlying principle was genuinely understood there. It simply never scaled up into full-sized carts, almost certainly because there was no suitable draft animal available anywhere in the Americas capable of pulling one, horses having gone extinct on the continent thousands of years earlier. With no cattle or comparable animals available to replace them, a similar pattern shows up in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where disease carried by the tsetse fly made large draft animals impractical across the transport in the first place. The wheel, it turns out, was never simply a single clever object. It was an entire interconnected system, requiring the right terrain, the right draft animals, and generations of accumulated carpentry skill all at once, and where even one of those pieces was missing, the wheel simply had nothing to offer. But where the conditions did line up, the wheel eventually became something far bigger than transportation alone. Once humans fully grasped rotational motion, they began finding it useful almost everywhere. Water wheels appear in the archaeological and historical record by around the 3rd century BCE in the eastern Mediterranean, converting the movement of flowing water into mechanical power capable of grinding grain. A genuinely significant shift, because for the first time, the wheel was no longer simply being pushed or pulled by muscle. It was capturing energy directly from the environment itself. That same core idea would eventually lead to windmills, and much later, to turbines and electrical generators. Gears, which are essentially wheels fitted with teeth, appear in remarkably sophisticated form in devices like the Antikythera mechanism, and an ancient astronomical calculating device recovered from a shipwreck and dated to around 100 BCE, technology that made precise mechanical timekeeping and eventually entire fields like navigation genuinely possible. Pulleys, wheels fitted with a grooved rim for rope, allowed small numbers of people to lift loads many times their own body weight, technology that shaped construction projects across the ancient Mediterranean world. And centuries later, the steam engine that helped ignite the Industrial Revolution relied on a crankshaft and flywheel to convert the back-and-forth motion of a piston into smooth, continuous rotational power, the same essential concept, refined almost beyond recognition.
There's even a small linguistic echo of just how old
and how significant this invention really was. Linguists studying the Indo-European language family have traced a shared root word behind the
wheel across an enormous number of its descendant languages. Evidence, once again, that the concept and its name existed before those languages ever split apart from each other. In a very real sense, humans named this invention before they scattered across much of the ancient
world and carried that name with them wherever they went. Right now, somewhere on this planet, an aircraft's landing gear
is retracting after takeoff, a potter somewhere is centering clay on a spinning wheel, and a child is rolling a toy car across a floor, and
every single one of them is relying on the exact same basic principle first worked out, likely on the Eurasian steppe somewhere around 5,000 years ago. It wasn't copied from anything in nature. It wasn't an obvious leap. It required generations of accumulated skill, the right animals, the right terrain, and conditions that, frankly, most of the ancient world never actually had. The wheel isn't one of humanity's oldest ideas. It's one of the youngest. And it might still be one of the most quietly consequential things we've ever built.
From nothing but wood, patience, and a stubborn refusal to keep dragging things across the ground.